Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to continue some of the line of questioning started by Senator McCaskill. Do you plan on rolling back the opening of infantry positions to women based on your previous statements?
Senator, I've never come into any job with an agenda, a preformed agenda of changing anything. I come in assuming the people before me deserve respect for the job they did and the decisions they made.
I asked specifically because in previous speeches, one from the Marines Memorial Club in San Francisco on April 16, 2015, you were asked specifically about whether we should open infantry positions and special forces combat jobs to women. And you said you did not think it was a good idea. You said when you mix, you know, that when you mix eros, when you mix affection for one another that could be manifested sexually, I don't care if you go anywhere in history, you will not find where this has worked. Never has it worked. And then in a previous speech on April 23rd, 2014, you said the idea of putting women in there is not setting them up for success. Could we find a woman who could run fast enough? Of course we could. Could we find a few who could do the pull-ups? Of course we could. That's not the point. That's not the point at all. It's whether or not you want to mix eros. And so in both of these question and answer sessions, you said you do not think you could do it. Have you changed your view on this issue?
Senator, I was not in a position to go back into government when I made those statements. There are many policies that have been enacted over many years, including the years since I've been on active duty. I'm coming in with the understanding that I lead the Department of Defense. And if someone brings me a problem, then I'll look at it. But I'm not coming in looking for problems. I'm looking for ways to get the department so it's at the most lethal stance. And in that regard, it's all about military readiness. I'm looking for military readiness and what we can do in that regard.
Do you plan to oppose women serving in these combat roles?
I have no plan to oppose women in any aspect of our military. In 2003, I had hundreds of Marines who happened to be women serving in my 23,000 person Marine division. And this is 10 years before I retired, and I put them right into the front lines alongside everyone else.
So you no longer believe that eros is a problem when men and women are serving together?
I believe that if we are going to execute policies like this, we had better train our leaders so they can handle all things that come from a policy that's decided in this town. That's our responsibility, to train our young leaders who are going to be dealing with factors that perhaps their fathers did not have to deal with.
In your book, Warriors and Citizens, and the interviews that you did afterwards, you were talking about the disconnect between civilians and the civilian elite's view of the military and the military's view of itself. And you cite various policy debates that you think there's a disconnect, and two that you cite. You said in recent policy debates, such as those about allowing homosexuals to serve openly, retaining a residual force in Iraq and Afghanistan, cutting military spending, assigning women to combat units, and other items. You believe that the American public is not nearly as concerned as it should be that the changes to military policies are accruing risk to our forces. We fear that an uninformed public is permitting political leaders to impose an accretion of social conventions that are diminishing the combat power of our military, disregarding our warfighting practitioners' advice. Do you believe that openly serving homosexuals along with women in combat units is undermining our force?
Senator, my belief is that we have to stay focused on a military that's so lethal that on the battlefield it will be the enemy's longest day and their worst day when they run into that force. I believe that military service is a touchstone for patriots of whatever stripe. I mean, it's simply the way that they demonstrate their commitment. And I believe that right now the policies that are in effect, unless a service chief brings something to me where there's a problem that's been proven, then I'm not going in with an idea that I'm going to review these and right away start rolling something back.
Do you believe that allowing LGBT Americans to serve in the military or women in combat is undermining our lethality?
Frankly, Senator, I've never cared much about two consenting adults and who they go to bed with.
So the answer is no?
Senator, my concern is on the readiness of the force to fight and to make certain that it's at the top of its game, so when we go up against an enemy, the criteria for everything we do in the military up until that point, when we put our young men and women across the line of departure, is they will be at their most lethal stance. That's my obligation as I move into this job.
So
that's how I will look at the
Thank you. And for the record, I'd like in writing whether you believe a gender. Understood, sir. Just for the record,
Senator's
you answer
time
that
has
question.
expired.
Thank you.
Please adhere to the rules of the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
Thank you. Secretary Kelly, included in the President's budget is a provision that says, quote, the Secretary of Homeland Security may condition a grant or cooperative agreement awarded by the Department of Homeland Security to a state or political subdivision of a state for a purpose related to immigration, national security, law enforcement, or preventing, preparing for, or protecting against or responding to acts of terrorism. Specifically, the budget authorizes the Secretary to condition grants on compliance with any lawful request by DHS to detain an alien for a period not to exceed 48 hours. Are you familiar with that?
I'm fairly familiar with it, yes.
I'm sorry?
Fairly familiar with it, yes.
Grants that are subject to new conditions would include the Urban Area Security Initiative, a DHS grant that provided California last year with $124 million to help urban areas prevent, mitigate, and respond to acts of terrorism. This grant supports more than 100 incorporated jurisdictions in 12 counties in the Bay Area of California alone. It supports them to buy equipment, enhance systems, and conduct trainings so that localities can prevent, mitigate, and respond to acts of terrorism. Are you aware of that?
That's a good thing.
Another DHS grant is the State Homeland Security Grant Program that provided California $60.2 million last year to support state, local, and tribal efforts to prevent terrorism and to prepare the nation for threats and hazards that pose the greatest risk to security in the United States. Is that correct?
I wish I had the same document I could read from as you do.
Are you familiar with this grant program in your department?
I'm familiar with the grant program.
And are you aware that there are a number of federal courts that have imposed civil liability on local governments for complying with ICE detainer orders that were not supported by probable cause? Can you answer the question?
Am I aware of that?
Yes.
I am.
And in order then to comply with a 48-hour ICE detainer made with no probable cause, wouldn't that force the jurisdiction to choose whether to comply with a federal court ruling or forfeit vital public safety funds that are administered by your department?
I'm not a lawyer, but I think that federal law is state law is state law, and if you know, we have a different view of the impact of some of the state rulings, but I'm not. Well,
imagine, sir, if you will, that you were a local law enforcement leader presented with a choice of either complying with federal law that means that you may expose your department and your jurisdiction to civil liability, or forfeiting DHS funds that are designed and intended to help you fight terrorism at a local level. Wouldn't you agree that puts those law enforcement leaders in it's almost a Hobbesian choice?
Well, Senator,
how are they supposed to choose?
Had you not cut me off, I would have said the same thing you just said. Probably not as eloquently, but I'd have said the same thing you said. I appreciate the fix they're in. I appreciate that they get their legal advice from the state and locals. And below the radar, we work with every police and sheriff department in this country to the degree that they can and are comfortable with.
Secretary Kelly, what do you mean below the radar? They have two choices, and they are accountable. Excuse me, sir. They are accountable to their jurisdiction, to the bodies that may have appointed or elected them. Right. And they have to make choices. What do you mean below the radar?
We talk to them on the telephone. And
what are you instructing them to do when presented with those two choices?
And we tell them to, whatever they can do within the law, the interpretation, we're willing to work with them.
So are you aware that there are local law enforcement...
At least finish once before you interrupt me?
Sir, with all due respect.
With all due respect, Senator.
Are you instructing local law enforcement leaders that they can overlook a DHS detainer request so they're not exposed to criminal liability?
We talk to them about whatever they're comfortable with, whatever they think they can do within the interpretation of their local attorneys general, as an example, or local lawyers.
So when they're instructed,
once,
excuse
Senator,
me, I'm asking the questions.
but I'm trying to answer the question.
When they tell you, as I know local police chiefs are being told, that it would expose their municipality to civil liability if they comply with the detainer request, are you telling them that you will not withhold the DHS federal funding that they rely on?
Okay, before I start to answer, will you let me finish?
If it's responsive to the question, of course.
We talk to them on the phone and tell them whatever they're comfortable with, whatever they can do within the interpretation of their local lawyers or legal advisors, we'll work with them.
So are you willing to then not withhold federal funding when police chiefs tell you that they cannot comply with the detainer request because they've been told by their lawyer that they will expose their jurisdiction or their department to civil liability?
I'm willing to work with them in any way I can within the law, federal and local law, whatever they're comfortable with. I don't make threats to people, Senator.
Thank you.